typically found was that older people tended to survive it, not the younger people. Because the younger people would go in and their thing was like, I need to survive. And they were only living for themselves. If you only lived for yourself, think about how it is that you might live. I wonder if any of you have ever thought about killing yourselves before. And what stopped you was that one person you're flashing in their head. I don't want to ruin their day. You know, I don't want to ruin their life. I can't die because if I die, then my mom is going to be in total misery if I do that. And so that's the thing that keeps you alive. If you're only living for yourself, it becomes very difficult to live. And by the way, it becomes damn near impossible to live virtuously and to live morally. If you're only living for yourself, it becomes damn hard to live virtuously and morally because you start thinking, I just got to get ahead. I have to put myself above everybody else. And if you don't live virtuously and morally, just like everybody else, you still have to wake up in the morning and look at yourself in the mirror. And unless you're a psychopath, that will become very difficult to do. Now, think about how easy it is to give up on yourself. Now, think about how hard it is to give up on others. What's the thing that kept you alive, maybe, in those dark times? You think about your mother at your funeral wondering why, or your best friends, or your fill in the blank. And that's what he found. In those camps, the people who survived were the ones who found meaning and purpose, even in the depths and the darkness of a concentration camp. So if you can find meaning and purpose in a concentration camp, man, I hope you can find it in your English class. And there could be more than that too, by the way. What do you suppose happens if you work really hard there and you work very well? Yeah, maybe you'll get promoted. Maybe suddenly you'll find yourself as a manager. Maybe you'll find yourself as a regional manager. Maybe you'll find yourself moving up because you commit to being the best, fill in the blank, whatever it is that you are at that moment. That stalker, S-T-O-C-K-E-R, not following people home, the best, whatever it is that you're doing at that moment. Because really, like, in the case of that, like if you're working at Walmart and you're stocking shelves, what else are you doing between the hours of 9 to 5, if that's when you're working? I mean, are you doing something else with your life? So wouldn't it make sense to be the best, whatever it is that you're doing at that moment? Because otherwise you're kind of getting in the way of yourself. Like, you're there anyway, you might as well be really good at it. And who knows, maybe something valuable will come from it. And if nothing valuable does come from it, well, still something valuable could come from it, which is that you're doing a great job. You're getting used to doing that, and you can get used to expecting those kinds of things from other people in your life, perhaps. Others. Where else would we find that life feels like it's unbearable because of our circumstances? So where might we encounter people like that are just like annoying people around us?
Could be like at work or at school.
Okay. We'll go with school because it's one type. If the people in your English class around you are annoying, how can you handle that? Sorry, we'll make it your math class. Make it less personable right now. How can you handle that? You said that there are varying levels there. Putting your own AirPods, well, if you have to, maybe, I don't know if the teacher will let you do that or not. Having to move, maybe they'll let you do that, sure, perhaps. Tell them to shut up, now you're in personal confrontation with them. Like, how it is that you choose to behave in that circumstance is everything. Notice that what's not possible probably is having them move. And I don't know if anyone ever like sat there and said to you, like, shut up, and you go, okay, you're right. Probably has. Oh, then you're a good man. If you can sit there and objectively look at yourself and go, yeah, I guess I was being obnoxious, I'm sorry. That's a pretty rare person, but that's also a personality that's probably can go very far in life because you're able to self-assess, drop the ego. Because even if you realize you're being obnoxious, the ego might come up, called the affective filter might come up, and then cause you to argue with them anyway. Even though I'm sure it's not you guys, but I wonder if any of you know people who have argued even though they knew that they were wrong. If you've ever argued before, knowing that you were wrong, but you're like, damn it, I'm gonna argue anyway. It happens. And mean, very often in life, we have to be able to look at ourselves and say, wow, I'm wrong. At the very least, can look at it and say, I can see why they would think that I was wrong. And then maybe adapt accordingly. But you know what hasn't changed in those circumstances is the people who we find to be annoying. That we probably won't go to the teacher and say, hey, could you move them? Could I go to a different class? I'm sorry, could you move them? In other words, they're probably going to stay the circumstance. They're probably going to stay the situation. But that's also true about a lot of things in life. That the situation itself is not going to change. The circumstance is not going to change. If you can change the circumstance, well then sure, absolutely, that makes sense. Change the circumstance. But if you can't change the circumstance, then we're challenged at that point to change ourselves. And we don't like to hear that because but it's not my fault. Well, whose fault is it? Is it really a matter of fault? It might be a matter of fault, but it also might just be, this is just kind of like the way that life is. Maybe it's a personality thing. Maybe the personalities just don't get along. They're just rubbing the wrong way. And maybe as try as you might, you just can't get them to work out. It happens. It happens. It happens to me. And as hard as you might try, you might just not understand why you can't just get things to be civil or kind. It's just the way that it is. And so if you can't change your circumstances, then you're forced to perhaps to change yourself. Now, you're not really forced to, by the way. You could just be angry. You could just be resentful. You could just sigh a lot. You could just complain in your head a lot. You can just be miserable all the time. And the whole time that you're miserable, the people around you probably are not. At least not directly. At least not directly. But of course they are miserable to an extent. Otherwise they wouldn't be behaving the way that they are. In other words, they feel miserable about where they are because they're going through the same thing. They can't change the circumstance in their own minds, and so they're trying to change themselves. But it tells you that there's also a negative way in which you can change yourself. You really don't want to get to a point where, with a lot of things, where you just don't care and you become apathetic, because then it's very difficult to kind of live with where you are. It becomes very difficult to live with where you are. And so what oftentimes people will do, like here, is try to distract the people around you. Other people are trying to listen, so what do? Hey, listen up, blah, blah, blah. Because you're committed to not getting anything out of it. You're committed to not growing. And we understand why typically. It's because we feel lost, because we're confused, because we're frightened by what our confusion is going to say about us as a person. And so what we try to do is drag down other people around us. Also, a very negative thing. You're making the world worse by doing that. You're not making the world better. You're certainly not making your world better. And you're not even leaving it neutral. You're actually making the people around you worse off. And even if you think like, well, they deserve it, it still doesn't matter. You're still making the world worse. You certainly lose the ability now to walk around and talk about how good of a person you are and how you don't do anything wrong. And then you're going to find oftentimes in life now, you're going to have all kinds of problems and difficulties and struggles that you don't have to have. There are a lot that you do have to have, but there are also a lot that you don't have to have. And so what do? Well, you confront the ones that you can't avoid. And then you avoid the ones that you can. Anybody look this guy up by any chance? He's got a great story. He's got a great story, man. What's that?
Is the reason he has a good story because he killed himself?
No. No, he didn't. That's what's amazing about the guy. The fact that he didn't.
He should have.
Yeah, he should have.
Oh, he survived the Holocaust.
Oh, God.
Yeah. Yeah, he survived the Holocaust. He wasn't just, and by the way, he didn't just survive it. This guy was in concentration camps for 3 years. Most people survived about 6 months. This guy was in there for 3 years. And he was a psychiatrist, by the way, when he went in. And he came out. He wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, which is a book that, there are a few books that I think everyone should read. One of them is Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. Another one is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. It's not a long book at all, it's a very short book. And we're going to look at one section from this book next semester. But in short, he was trying to figure out in the concentration camps, why did some people survive and why did other people die? And it wasn't what you would think it was. It wasn't like the youngest and the strongest were the ones who survived. They were not the ones who survived. In fact, they were the ones who typically died. When you look at those videos of concentration camps, really look at it sometime. Look at how old you think those people are, the ones who were there. And what you typically found was that older people tended to survive it, not the younger people. Because the younger people would go in and their thing was like, I need to survive. And they were only living for themselves. If you only lived for yourself, think about how it is that you might live. I wonder if any of you have ever thought about killing yourselves before. And what stopped you was that one person you're flashing in their head. I don't want to ruin their day. I don't want to ruin their life. I can't die because if I die, then my mom is going to be in total misery if I do that. And so that's the thing that keeps you alive. If you're only living for yourself, it becomes very difficult to live. And by the way, it becomes damn near impossible to live virtuously and to live morally. If you're only living for yourself, it becomes damn hard to live virtuously and morally because you start thinking, I just got to get ahead. I have to put myself above everybody else. And if you don't live virtuously and morally, just like everybody else, you still have to wake up in the morning and look at yourself in the mirror. And unless you're a psychopath, that will become very difficult to do. And my goodness, now imagine if you actually do get people in your life. You can't trust them because you're probably thinking that they live the exact same way that you do. It becomes very difficult to form meaningful relationships with people. And then if you do have a family at some point, imagine that person raising their kids. I don't even have to imagine it. I've met those people. I've met their kids. And these are some of the most miserable, angry, resentful, contemptuous people you'll ever meet in your life. This is why when you come across highly successful people, one of the things is, and some of you will experience this, I have students who experience this, they'll go to work for a company and they'll meet the owner. And we typically think of the owner like, he's just, he's a jerk, he's mean, blah, blah. No, if you work hard and you distinguish yourself, there's a really good chance that owner is gonna notice it. And they're gonna see something of themselves in you, and they're gonna bring you along. I have so many former students who have risen through these companies at places you wouldn't expect. We just talked to one last week. The guy does restoration. Like when a building catches fire or floods or whatever, he went to work for this company and worked hard. He's distinguished himself, and the owner has nobody who he wants to kind of pass the torch on to. And so he's making him a partner. The guy's been there for like a couple years, 3 years, and he's making him a partner now in this business. Something that most of us would never even thought of before. Why? Because lifting people up, elevating people, that's something that if you have any sense, that's something that you're going to want to do. It's difficult to live otherwise. And as much as we might think like, I can get by like that, we'll see. We'll see. Because one thing's for sure, you won't get opportunities from other people, because once they figure out what a snake you are, you will have to generate all of your own opportunities. And the only way to do that is going to be through deceit, backstabbing. And then your reputation will precede you. And there will be some people, of course, who will prosper that way. But you'll find the overwhelming majority of people are not going to. So, at least in the concentration camps, for sure, that's what Frankl found. It was the people who were trying to live for themselves only. Those are the ones who didn't make it. Now, think about how easy it is to give up on yourself. Now, think about how hard it is to give up on others. What's the thing that kept you alive, maybe, in those dark times? You think about your mother at your funeral wondering why, or your best friends, or your fill in the blank. And so what Frankl found was that the people who survived in the concentration camps were the people who found some meaning, some purpose to it. There's no meaning or purpose in the suffering of a concentration camp. That would be stuff like, there would be a pile of rocks, and they would say, that big pile of rocks, move them over there. And you'd move a pile of rocks 100 yards over someplace else, and then you'd finish, and they'd say, all right, move them back. It was stuff like that. You would be abused for seemingly no reason. You'd be tortured. You'd be shot just indiscriminately. There's no meaning in it. It's just chaos. You can't predict it. And imagine living in that kind of a situation. And so how do you survive there? Well, you have to take some kind of responsibility. And what he found was that the people who took responsibility for other people, those were the people who survived in that situation. And if you wonder about how powerful that can be, I think most of you could probably look at your families. Look at a parent who works a job that they really don't like for less money than they probably deserve, for more hours than they want to put in, and all of that. And yet, why do they do it? So that you can have the new phone, so that you can have new shoes, so that you can have clothes. And you might argue with them and fight with them, and you guys might butt heads all the time. But why do they do it? For you. Even if you don't think so, they do it for you. And that might be the thing that gets your parents up every day to go to work. And some of you, I don't know, man. I mean, for myself anyway, I look at it and think like my parents just sacrificed way too much for me to just be mediocre. And yet so many of us accept that mediocrity. I don't know, my parents suffered way too much for that, to make it worthwhile in some way. And so Frankl found that the people who would take responsibility for others, those were the ones who survived. We're all marching together and, I fall down, a couple of opportunities, you could just go, oh, well, Scallon's dead, and stomp over me and keep walking. Or you could stop and go, damn it, Scallon, pick me up. And if you do that, a guard might come over and hit you with a stick. But now you have to survive. Why? Because if I die, he's gonna die. This guy can't make it without me. It's still hostile. You're still pissed off at the person, but you're taking a responsibility for them. And now I can't die. It's easy to let ourselves die. It's easy to criticize ourselves. It's easy to allow ourselves to go to crap. It's hard to do that for people that we take a responsibility for. So now you have to step up and say, well, I have to survive because that person has to survive. And that's what he found. In those camps, the people who survived were the ones who found meaning and purpose, even in the depths and the darkness of a concentration camp. So if you can find meaning and purpose in a concentration camp, man, I hope you can find it in your English class. I hope you can find it in your job that you're working at right now. I hope you can find it in whatever circumstances that you find yourself, because the circumstances aren't going to change. Maybe they will change, hopefully. I do hope that they do. But if they don't, it isn't the circumstances that are unbearable. It's our approach to it. Find a meaning, find a purpose. And if you can do that, if you have a why, you can survive anyhow. You'll find a how. Questions, comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, critiques? Happy Tuesday.